So the last panel of the day, the last panel of our Civil Society Days 2017, and it's going to be a rapid fire panel because we have very little time left. I know everyone's very tired. We've lost quite a lot of people who are taking a little break, but we're going to get started nonetheless. Our last panel is going to look at something that we've been speaking about left and right, but we really want to focus on it for the last 30, 45 minutes. So we're going to ask both our panelists to be as brief and to the point as they can, but also anyone who wants to raise a point from the question from the floor. I've got one assignment for everyone. We've called this day Commitments Day. That's what we wanted to talk about. What are you going to do? So everyone that I will invite to speak, I will ask you your views and your analysis, but what are you going to do? What's that one commitment that you are taking home? That's for all of us. So let me introduce the panelists. We are joined by two very distinguished civil society platform leaders, Claudia León from Mexico, who is a coordinator of the International Network for Migration and Development, and Pietro Aeberhard, who coordinates the Swiss Civil Society Platform on Migration and Development. And we're very, very honored that we have with us here today, this late on Saturday, Mr. Pietro Mona. You've heard him speaking before today. He works for the Swiss government, for the Swiss Development Corporation, and he's been recently promoted as ambassador for development, forced displacement, and migration. So yeah, we're looking at national strategies and at commitments. What are we going to do? So I'd like to start with you, Claudia. If you could give us a sense of what civil society groups in Mexico are currently already doing, organizing around this global compact, and what you've been taking out of the discussions now that you're going to take forward when you go back to Mexico. Very short.
Thank you. I'm going to speak in Spanish, so everyone can use their phones or whatever they are called. I know we're all tired, and I had the most difficult part, I think we as a panel, because at the end it's talking not only the closing, but also national. So I'm going to start in Spanish now that everyone is wearing their headphones. Bien.
In order to speak about strategies, and in this case, the national context is really difficult, especially with a global compact that is being drafted in a non-participative way, with many doubts about how information is flowing down to the national level, and not only the national level, but to the local level, municipalities. So I think we have many challenges before us, but before that, I would like to speak about the opportunities that this situation implies. I think that the global compact, even if it is a bit fussy, we do not know yet what it's going to mean, especially for the grassroots of our society. I think it's an invitation to organize ourselves. I think this is going to help us promote the organization among us, especially for the organizations of the civil society. We will be able to denounce the migration policies at the national and international level that are affecting us directly, not only us as organizations, and we have a lot of work to do in that sense, but mainly affecting families and migrants, and those that work in the advocacy of migrants and not being attacked for that. So I hope that we are all moved in order to organize so that this global compact includes our voices. Now I'm going to speak about the challenges that I will try to make some suggestion about how we can organize ourselves better at a national level and how we can start demanding to have a better representation in this process.
I think that one of the mechanisms we should promote nationally are the institutional mechanisms to encourage citizens' participation. We would like to take part, to participate. By how? We encourage governments that they invite us for us to participate. From the local level, we should do that. We should build institutional organizations that encourage citizens' participation, mechanisms which should be clear, transparent, and inclusive. One example I can tell you about is what we saw at the citizens' councils. I've also had the opportunity of accompany and help at the National Citizens Council for Migration. Thanks to that, we've been able to start a dialogue between civil society with the counterpart, the government, the National Institute for Migration, which is the department that executes migration policies. Here we come across governments, but here we are dealing mainly with diplomats. Those that work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are not the ones that execute the migration policies. So we need to talk mainly with legislators and with those people that execute the migration policies. So these councils, these citizens' councils, have been created by norm, by law. So I think that's a good instrument that ensures our direct participation. Also, we should set priorities in our agendas, in civil society's agendas. For example, we've had an experience in Mexico thanks to the collective group called Migraciones para las Américas, where we have specific programs for migration. We organize ourselves in order to make clear proposals to the government. The different policies that come from civil society have gone bottom up. So we've heard here that information should reach the different organizations, should reach the basis, and it should be clearly understood because the messages are very difficult and very complex. What happens with those experts that work with the basis and deal every day with migrants? So through these processes, we've managed to create a bottom-up approach from the basis going up. Other two things I'd like to mention are the monitoring. From the national level, we should monitor the whole consultation process, not just the global compact when it's already been done. So the consultation process should be inclusive. We should ensure that our voice is heard in those consultations. And we should also ask for governments to be accountable. Yesterday, we held a meeting between Latin American governments and civil society, coming also from Latin America, and we noticed that the Latin American governments, in spite of the fact that one of them that is a partner in the social pact is Mexico, they haven't gotten information about what is this all about, how the regional consultation has taken place. Even governments mentioned that they're somehow alienated to the global pact and they feel excluded, especially in Latin America. I'm not sure if you experience the same in other regions from the Southern Hemisphere. So it'd be interesting to monitor the consultation processes and to be in touch with diplomats who would be contacting different governments, who would be, and the people that would be legislating and who would be ensuring this legislation is taken into place. Also, we need to monitor the budget. How much is it going to cost? We should, how much is it going to cost to implement the Global Compact? Because if we don't include the budget, we'll have beautiful legislation, but in the end of the day, civil servants will tell us there's not enough money to implement it. So we should be able also to decide how is this budget going to be earmarked. So is it going to be used to increase detention, to increase deportations, and to militarize through these development programs, which in the end of the day, all they do is to militarize and to content migration from the south to the north, so that we focus and we get budget that is focuses more on integration. And thank you very much, because I'm running out of time.
So sorry to be cutting you short, Claudia. And that will maybe go for the other panelists as well. There'll be another round where you can maybe say also something about how these great pieces of advice on the agenda setting, on the costs, on the accountability mechanisms translate into actions for you after the forum and your own network. But let us turn to Mr. Pietro Mona first, who maybe if you could give us, for starters, a bit of a sense and a reminder of how, again, civil society can be engaged in this global compact process according to the modalities, but then relating it back to what does that mean for us engaging with our national governments, and what does that mean for you as a Swiss government engaging with your Swiss civil society?
Okay, thank you very much. So, very small questions. So I have approximately 2 hours, so it's okay. No, but thank you very much, Wies, and thank you very much to the organizers of having invited me. So I think that I'll start from another point, but I'll get to all your questions together. Because I was asked by one of the organizers, I'm not going to name his or her name, to be a little bit provocative. So I also have three sort of maybe a bit provocative statements. And the first one is actually process trumps substance. And this is sometimes hard to hear, but if you have the best messages, the good ideas, but if you mess up the process, if you don't understand the process, if you don't know when to act, with whom to act, then you may have the best idea, but nobody will listen to it. It will not be anchored in a document. And this is sometimes very difficult for people who are so passionate about their work as all of you are. So this gives me the segue to your first question on the process. The modalities resolution has been negotiated, so in there are different levels or different phases that are foreseen. We are now in the phase 1, which is sort of the consultative phase where ideas should be gathered. And for that there are sort of what I call formal processes, although they are called informal thematic sessions, but sort of that is sort of what is really mentioned in the resolutions. Those are the 6 thematic sessions that were mentioned a couple of times. But there are also regional consultations that are going to be organized by the regional economic communities. So look out in your regions for information about them. So ESCAP, ECLAC, and so on, ECA. They will all organize formal regional consultations as part of the consultation process. They will start, I think, around late August and go into end of October or early November. Then, of course, there's the stock taking in Mexico that was also mentioned a couple of times. But the modalities resolution also mentions national consultations as a possibility. Switzerland, for example, is funding a couple of national consultations that are managed by IOM, but very much implemented by local partners in South Asia. So there's going to be national consultations, among others, in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. And this is also a very important element to mention when it comes to the possibilities to understand where you have entry points. Then there are all sorts of informal processes, like GFMD, which is mentioned in the modalities resolution, but it's not a formal UN process. The regional consultative processes, a lot of them are very engaged in the Global Compact process, the Abu Dhabi Dialogue, Colombo process, and many others. So that is also an opportunity for civil society to jump in. The second provocative statement that I wanted to place in the room is forced return will be part of the Global Compact. And I know a lot of you have a problem with that. I understand it, but it's a reality that a lot of governments have forced return as a priority. So as civil society organizations, you have 2 choices, I guess. And I'm not qualifying any of them. One is to keep pushing for no deportation as an advocacy message, which I think is certainly a viable strategy. The other strategy is also to engage with governments on, if there is forced return, what are minimal standards that have to be upheld on forced return. Peter Sutherland, the former SRSG, has included such recommendations for the Global Compact to develop guidelines on forced return, for example. So that is also an option for civil society to engage at the national level as well. The third provocative statement, you all know it, it has been mentioned, there is a shrinking space for civil society, there is a shrinking space for human rights in the UN at the moment. And this is an incredibly unfortunate reality, but it's a reality that we all have to face, governments like Switzerland as well, who are trying to do our best to push back, but of course also civil society who are directly confronted with this shrinking space. So this is also something that we have to keep. I'm not trying to demotivate you, I'm just trying to give you a picture of what the reality is, and that we have to include these realities when you then act with the national governments to push back, because the shrinking space for civil society is a threat throughout the UN spectrum. It's not specific to migrants organizations. It is all over the place. And this has to be part, hence, of your advocacy with governments, of your interaction with governments, to try to push that back as much as possible through all different instruments. So what can governments, or how can you interact with at the national level? I think a lot of good examples already came. A few more from my side very quickly. I think one important thing is also learn from other processes. Reach out to your colleagues in the civil society community who have worked, for example, on the 2030 agenda, who have worked on gender issues, who have worked on equal rights for people with disabilities. Yesterday, the German parliament has passed a law allowing same-sex marriage, for example. I mean, it's personal. I think it's a great step by the German parliament. But behind there is also a civil society movement, a movement that has brought forward that. Learn from this process. What are the triggers at the national level to allow this process to come to fruition and come to these results? Another point: know your partners, know your entry points. Quick question. How many in this room have the cell phone number of the Global Compact coordinator in your country? Yes. Okay, so the first message here, try to remember these people, because that means that there is already a link between civil society and the government. These are entry points, established entry points that you can build on. So these are low-hanging fruits of governments that you already established a work relationship on that. For the others, I know some governments you will probably never get the cell phone numbers because they don't want to engage with civil society. But I guess there are a couple of others who if you go and look for, if you go and knock on the right doors, you will get the cell phone number. The cell phone number, it's obviously just a symbol, but it's a fact of not just trying to establish a one-off contact. Bring these governments into a regular dialogue with you. If you establish a trust between governments, between your governments and yourself, this dialogue can help you throughout the process, in particular when the process then becomes more and more government-driven as we move into the negotiations. Governments are sitting in the negotiation room. They can feed back to you directly if you have that trust. What is going on? Where do you need to act? Where do you need to work through your civil society networks with certain governments because they simply don't understand what is happening and so on. So this element of trust, I think, is extremely important. The last point, don't get caught up with internal discussions among civil society organizations. And this is something I think it is extremely important in the process that we are now. Because we are in this peculiar situation that we're gearing up for a 10, 12, 15-year marathon with a sprint. So we have to move extremely quickly now. And in principle, if you don't move out tonight with the sense of knowing who your allies are, with whom you can work with on certain issues, it might become difficult. So I'm putting a little bit pressure on you, but I think you have to quickly look around. Who do you have the good feeling that you can create these alliances and build on that? If you waste too much time in trying to get the perfect global democratic elected alliance that covers all the elements, my guess is that by then the governments have already decided on the global compact. So move quickly, move fast, but also move smart. And this is something that we all have to do, also on the government side, but I think it's something that I want to give with you as another maybe slightly provocative ending point. Thank you very much.
Wow. Yes, if we're falling asleep, we're certainly awake now and provoked. But also some really practical advice that I think we could move on. So, Peter, moving on to you from a Swiss civil society platform perspective, are you moving quick and fast and smart?
Exactly, and smart. Yeah. So, well, you put me under pressure. Well, first of all, I think if we talk about national strategy, we have to say we see the Global Compact as an inspiration for discussion on national level. It's a multi-stakeholder approach. It's a technical approach where you have consultation on topics, on a holistic, wide approach on topics, and you enter into negotiations. We see this as an opportunity, but we also see it as a process. We do not expect the Global Compact to solve things or to sort out things, but it's an opportunity for us to enter into a process, into a dialogue with our government. I think the first step is you have to contextualize. If you talk on national strategies, it's context, right? We're in an environment where civil society is very strong, where I would say government is kind of embedded in civil society, so there is not this opposition. So for us, it's not so difficult to enter into contact and discuss with our government. They're very supportive for us, for other civil society organizations. On the other side, migration is not only about, as we mentioned wording, a flow of people or movement. It's an experience. It's a intercultural experience, first of all. And I think I say that because 30 years back, when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to make intercultural experience. I had to leave Switzerland. In the 20s, Switzerland was too Swiss for me, right? So I moved abroad to meet other people. Now I run a civil society platform with 70 members, 35 or 40 or 50, I don't even know, nations in Switzerland. So this intercultural experience is here. Foreign ministry do make international intercultural experiences. You here do on a global level make intercultural experiences. On a national level, you mentioned it, Ministry of Interior don't do that necessarily, right? Or experience that negatively. Population, can say it's very rich now to have the interchange I have on the civil society platform. On the other side, I'm also challenged, right? Challenged why? Because suddenly my compatriots don't see mountains as their identity, right? They don't eat fondue if we sit together, and they see chocolate as not a Swiss product, but the ingredients are not from Switzerland. So suddenly we're challenged in our basics, and I think it's very important to understand our approach is to start a process on national level, to open it into civil society. Means we see it as an entry point. So the Global Compact gives us an opportunity to frame, how would I say it, a modality for policy coherence on national level. So it gives us the opportunity. I think we need now to start utilize the Global Compact and the issues discussed on the Global Compact to coordinate, and that's also, I think, the finding of our side event yesterday. We have to start now to bring organizations together, take the topics, coordinate around these topics, and guide us, civil societies, into the direction to thematize what is discussed on the Global Compact. We don't know the outcome, As it was said yesterday, we don't know really the outcome of the compact, but we are sure that we know that we have to respond. We have to implement. Do you have to implement what's there or to improve what is there, right? And I think that's the issue. So if we start now interacting on the issues of the Global Compact with our governments, we have opened the entry point. There's open doors now, there's opportunities now, we have to go for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to an opportunity for a final round of questions and remarks from the floor. I can imagine you might have questions for our panelists on the basis of the advice that they put in front of you or the provocations that they put in front of you. So the floor is open for questions. But again, I would also really like to recommend you, if you would have a specific commitment that you're taking home from what you've heard, from what you've learned over the last 3 days, that would be, I think, a great way to end our final debate. So the floor is open, and I'm going to start with Bela, because I think you wanted to add some practical things.
Thank you, Wies. And just on the issue of process and substance, and I'm with you in Secretariat, so I'm an observer, but I've seen still a lot of confusion of people who are coming from the field in particular of how things work. And we've heard bits and pieces, and I want to just take 1 minute to run you through the 6 elements that are there, I think, in the resolution that the General Assembly has already adopted about the process. So the first one, the 6 thematic meetings, you're aware of that, but there are 2 ways in which civil society, or in fact 3 ways, already can engage. First, on the program, there are civil society speakers. Second, civil society, that is part of the accredited process, or through ECOSOC registration, can speak from the floor. A third element, so far, and probably it's continuing, on the second day from 9 to 10 a.m., the co-facilitators have a special dialogue with civil society. That's already 3 opportunities in the thematic sessions themselves. Then, I haven't heard the word, but there's a whole big number of paragraphs in that resolution on what we call informal hearings with civil society, academia, diaspora groups, migrant workers, national human rights institutions, and a couple of more groups. And the first one of that is 26 July. There is the accreditation process has finished. I'm sure many of you are on that list. If you're registered with ECOSOC, you can participate anyway. There are 4 of those days scheduled in the next 1.5 years. And so the first is 26 July, and then the second will be 4th of October, the third will be 18 December, and then a couple of opportunities next year as well. Then on the regional consultation, so just to be very clear, you've seen the list from Colin on the civil society consultations, and you've heard from Pietro about the official consultations of the Economic and Social Commissions of the United Nations. So just to be sure, ECLAC Santiago is 30 and 31st August, ESCWA Beirut is 26-27 September, ECA is 18 to 20 October, and ESCAP is 6 to 8 November. And so also in those meetings of the regional commissions, as you know, there's a civil society process. So you will hear from the regional commissions, engage with them. And then very, very importantly, we've talked about national consultations. There is a paragraph 7 in that resolution which actually invites member states to hold those. So you can hold your governments accountable. You can go with that resolution that they agreed in New York and you say, look, we are supposed to have national consultations and they are multi-stakeholder. That's the word that is being used. So I think there are many opportunities and I encourage you all to use them in the next 6 months. Finally, we talked about cell phones, but let me talk about one website, and that is the website refugeesmigrants.un.org. Refugeesmigrants, one word, .un.org. You will see there a tab on the Compact for Migration with a lot of subtabs, and there you will find all the dates, all these procedures, all those opportunities for engagements, all the conclusions from regional and thematic sessions. Refugeesmigrants.un.org, Compact for Migration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bela. Thank you very much, Bela, in particular for that reminder that governments have agreed to do national consultations, and I'm sure many are don't have this no longer on the radar, so that seems to be a very concrete entry point for many of us. If I can start at the back of the room and then work to the front. So the lady all the way at the back in the blue dress.
Thank you. I'm called Tabitha. I work with the All Africa Conference of Churches, liaison to the African Union. This is just mostly about, thank you first of all for your input and presentations. I would like to say that for the representatives from Africa, the African Union, as you know, which is based in Addis Ababa, is also giving platform for CSOs in Africa to give an input to the Global Compact. So I think what we need to know, first of all, is who to deal with, because many people don't know exactly what's happening. You have CSOs from different countries and who don't have access to know what's going on at the continental level in terms of policy. So as you know, the AU, IOM, and United Nations Economic Commission for Africa are the ones doing the Africa-led consultations, and I think that CSOs here from Africa, you could also consult with me, and then we could see how we could best bring our input also. Apart from the consultation which we will have through IOM, we have also many ways to also input. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there anyone else on that side at the back? Gentleman over there. And then Kevin, and then Michelle, and then we'll move to
Voy a hablar en español.
I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Nelson
García Lobo from Honduras. We hope the Global Compact will focus on defending human rights relating to all migrants. And also there are things, several things to bear in mind. First of all, to find a creative solution on how ensure the Global Compact helps all migrants, going beyond Facebook, going beyond all the things we publish on the social networks, because migrants are not always connected as we believe they are. They not always have that possibility. Something else important to bear in mind is how can socialize or make that the compact, Global Compact, known among governments, especially people, civil servants that work for the government, those that have got a permanent contact with migrant population, immigration officers, for example. And thirdly, we should create a regional observatory and also a national observatory which would allow us to monitor how the Global Compact is being complied with.
Thank you very much, and also thank you everyone for trying to keep it short. So we had Kevin, I saw here, and then Michelle and Raoul, and then we'll move to the other side of the room. Yeah, so if you could identify yourself.
I'm sorry. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you, Mr. Mona, for your candor. A nice splash in the face, if you will. So I was going to make a statement at the end of the day about what we all should go and say one thing to our governments, but I want you to react to it and see if it's what you would agree with. That this document has to have teeth for it to be worth it. And what I mean by teeth is not necessarily that every word has to be binding or it has to be international law, but that there have to be specific targets that nations agree to, and there has to be some accountability to those targets, however that looks. Some sort of monitoring system, some sort of reporting system, etc. Is that a good approach for us to take? Because it seems like if we focus on the language and just what the language is going to look like, we're going to end up where the New York Declaration was. And I think the language will eventually take care of itself. But is it the right approach to go to the government and say, this really has to have something that you do positively and a goal that you meet, whether it be 10% resettlement, 10% legal avenues, whatever it is. Could you react to that for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And then we had 2 points here in the front.
So Michelle Lavoie from PICAM. Thanks also very much, Pietro, for asking about the cell phone issue. And I don't know if this question is directed to you or to Bella. But I think there's a lot of energy in the room for really this whole focus on the national level, and I wanted to just draw on that and pick up on a very practical question. That I think that there's a lot of organizations that want to be able to contact their national person, but might not even know who that person is, or the people. And I've also looked on the website to try to direct some of our own members in Europe to them, but I can't really find that. So I don't know, and I know that other organizations in other regions are most likely more advanced in some of this, so I know maybe this isn't as relevant, but it's just a question, what would you also give as advice to try to find these people? And I'm saying it here in the room because I think, you know, the newer ones can also benefit from that. And I think the other follow-up, I really liked your question, Kevin, and I was also thinking about what you talked about, kind of the red lines and deportation. And what came out of our sessions on deportation was a red line on children because of forced return being deeply traumatic for children and their families. I think we had probably a realistic sense that this will be an issue that's looked at in the compact. But I wanted to maybe pose a further question is what percentage probably will the compact occupy on return if we think that it will have a big focus on return? Because I think that's also a bigger question is we know it's a reality. I think many of us in here are also trying to work with that reality and keep our principles and keep our ideals, but we're also trying to push agendas. And how much we think this will be an overarching kind of look on forced return and a little bit on human rights and the other things, or so it's just any sense of that. Thank you.
Well, we have already 10 years of the GFMD. I've been almost in all the editions. And one of the things that I'm really worried, or I want to ask you if you have any sense, I think it's a good initiative, the Global Compact. As I understand it, it's trying to move from a reactive and defensive approach to a more strategic way of looking at the migration problematic. But the main problem, as you put it, Pietro, at the beginning, this balance between process and substance, I think what really worries us, if we are going through all this complex process that we are not very sure how, at the end, things are going to be decided because there are lots of negotiations in the process. And at the end, my main worry is implementation. Because we can get, with very good ideas, we can get involved in a very interesting and important process, but how about implementation? Because we haven't seen much about implementation in these 10 years.
Okay, so we're going to take 4 more points from that side of the room. I'm very sorry for that side of the room. So we go from the back to the front. I think that's Tatsi having up her arm. Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tatsi Makabuag. I'm from Migrant Forum in Asia. I would like to thank the Swiss government representative again for being very direct with the intervention and for giving us ideas how to engage at the national level. And we believe it's also very important to do this engagement at the national level and to do our homework as civil society. Maybe just to share from the Asia process, Colin has already mentioned that we're having a regional consultation, but aside from this, we are also trying to, at the national level, try to engage with government representatives, working with our partners. Prior to coming here, the partners from the Philippines already had a dialogue with the Philippine government, and we're also trying to reach out to a number of governments in Asia to organize consultations, joint consultations with civil society. And in terms of, I think it's not easy to identify the government representatives at the national level. Maybe just a comment to what Michelle has done. Sometimes there's even some confusion when we talk to some of the government ministries and they don't know who is handling the Global Compact, sometimes negotiations or consultations. So I think as civil society, we need to do our homework at the national level and really push for the different ministries looking at migration to take up this take this up and to push for civil society to be engaged and be involved. I think we need to we believe that we need to strengthen this process at the national level. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tachi. At the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I am still Beshid Najafi. I'm from grassroots organization, women grassroots organization in Cologne. I know how to contact my national government, but what I want to talk with them and to implement for our women, and that I am supporting them every day, is I have 2 points. And it's very important because we have talked about safe migration, and it is the laws have no sex, but some laws are woman specific. For example, family reunification is a woman specific law. It means that most of the husband come and apply for asylum, get protection, and the women and children come to Germany. And recently we have in Germany a law that actually exclude this family reunification. And the name is subsidiary protection, and for 3 years exclude this family reunification. It is a woman discrimination and family discrimination. I want to talk to my national government to change it. Another thing is...
Sorry to cut you short, but we're really running out of time. So if you have a question or one specific piece of advice, put it out there, but otherwise we have to go to the next question because we have to go back to
for me it's very important to ratify Istanbul Convention. Istanbul Convention is European Council Convention against violence against women, and Germany is ratifying, but with reservation actually in this point. And I want to promote and ask everybody that talk about this convention in their home country.
Okay, that's a clear recommendation. Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry for rushing everyone, but I have to acknowledge that we are here in the room with both our Moroccan co-chair and our German co-chair who made their time available on Saturday afternoon going into evening to be with us for the closing ceremony. So we're going to have to close soon. So this is going to be the final point from the floor, and then we go back to the panel and wrap it off. So the gentleman over here.
I represent the Foundation for Shelter and Support to Migrants in Malta. I think the role of diaspora in kind of translating what we were discussing here, both to migrants who are in contact with diaspora, but also advocating with national governments, is crucial. As we have said, many of the officials would not know, especially within the EU context, most of this dialogue will be happening on an EU level. So I don't know how many governments on the local level are involved, but also the most key important thing is the migrants, especially for those of us who are dealing with irregular migrants from the sub-Saharan Africa within the Mediterranean region. And just to say that there was a consultation in Uganda on the African continent, and diaspora was also involved as well. And I think that this is very key for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that into the discussion. And I'm really sorry, we're going to close the floor, so no more hands and no more remarks. We're going to go back to the panel, who I'm also going to ask again to be quite brief. Pietro, there were lots of questions, maybe obviously directed to you. You certainly provoked some thinking and some very practical questions. So if I could invite you first to respond to some of these questions, and then I'll ask both Pietro and Claudia to end us on a final piece of advice that you want to give to all of us here in the room.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief but still as comprehensive as possible. The question on the teeth, absolutely spot on. We heard a lot in the three thematic sessions that already happened. We heard that from a lot of governments saying we want the global compact that is action-oriented, that is practical, that it's not a collection of principles. We already have that with the New York Declaration. So the question is how coherent will governments remain on that? But at this stage, you have more than enough legitimacy to go back to your governments and say, we've heard that a lot of governments are talking about action-oriented global compacts, so here are some very concrete actions that we want. In that sense, let me wave maybe a last time this document in front of all of you. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is, if you go through it, there are very sharp principles and very sharp and measurable targets on a lot of important issues. So from my point of view, absolutely the right strategy to go and really be as firm, be as practical as possible. On the national contact, I understand it's not easy. I mean, you have, I guess, here also civil society organizations, federations that are present in a lot of countries, so work through your networks. Another spontaneous idea that I have is use, for example, and sorry, I have to wave it one more round, this one, because this is, it can be something else, but what I'm getting at is if you have something that you want to communicate with governments at this stage on the Global Compact process, and you want, for example, to go through the missions in New York, you can send something like this document. You can send something like another position paper that you think is important, and then add on that letter the request, if possible, for the missions in New York to get back to you with their contact persons at Capitol. And then centralize that somewhere in New York, and then through the network again, get back to your capitals. Obviously, not all the missions will respond on that, but maybe like that you get a couple of more cell phones together. On the return issue, again, it was a bit of provocation, but I still believe that forced return will be part of the Global Compact, including from Switzerland. That is, for us, it's part of the discussions if you want to have a comprehensive discussion on migration. On the percentage, I mean, honestly, I don't think that it will be more than a few paragraphs. So what I'm looking at, what we are hoping at, is to have a comprehensive global compact on migration that covers as broadly as possible all aspects of migration. And to have that comprehensiveness, I think return has to be part of it. So as we already have in the New York Declaration, there is a paragraph stating that there is an obligation by states to accept returning citizens. I think something like that will certainly will be carried forward in the Global Compact. Maybe something along the lines of the recommendation by Peter Sutherland of establishing some guidelines on standards on return. But I don't see it anywhere becoming the overarching topic. I think this is something that I don't feel it, certainly not in Switzerland, certainly not in many of our like-minded governments, and certainly not in the governments from the Global South, that this should be the overarching topic. It has to be part of it, I think, but it will be one of many, many, many issues, including issues on the human rights of migrants, on migration and development, on the role of diasporas, and so on. So I hope that I could disperse a little bit that fear that it will be sort of the overarching issue of the Global Compact. And the second last point on the process, yes, I know it's a bit of a crystal ball. We also don't know exactly what will come out of the Global Compact, but we know of the importance of the Global Compact, of the potential that it has, and hence of the relevance and importance to be part of that process. But I agree with you that ultimately the document, every document from the New York Declaration, the 2030 Agenda, and so on, the value of that document is not measured by the words that it contains, but by the change it reaches on the ground. So you can have the best document. If nobody's implementing it, you have reached nothing. So absolutely agree with you, the implementation is critical, and we have to look at it. This will be part of the Global Compact process to look at how can we mobilize the resources. Again, in my view, the Global Compact is part of the achievement of the 2030 agenda. So also when we talk about resources, for example, let's not forget that we have addressed financing for sustainable development, the financing for the implementation of the 2030 agenda. There are mechanisms in place. So maybe there is an avenue there to look also on these resources. And one very last point, and apparently my candor has been appreciated, so let me also be quite candid on one last point. That was mentioned on the law on family reunification that discriminates women. I don't know the context in Germany, but I disagree with that consideration as is. Not that women can be discriminated, I guess they can, but men can also be discriminated. So my call here is, whenever we talk about gender equality, let's also think about men and boys being discriminated, being victims of human trafficking, of human smuggling. I don't have anything against putting an attention on women, and in fact we are supporting the work of UN Women and their work, the great work they have done to include women's issue in the Global Compact. But when we talk about gender, don't forget that gender means women and men. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pietro. Pietro, if we can ask you for one or two final pieces of advice that you want to give to the group.
Okay, I'd like to summarize in two strategies on the national level, which we try to focus and we try to get support on it. And one is, I think it's absolutely important to coordinate on a national level in the process in response to the Global Compact and beyond for the implementation phase. You're mentioning the implementation phase. At this stage, when we made a recommendation towards our government, we were confronted with this issue on return. We were not aware of it. Our recommendation, we were not including this. So we have to go back and consult and push forward. So we need a coordination, consultation level on national level in order to have a dialogue on national level, in order to understand where the governments are going to, where they're heading to, and in order to be able to respond to that. Because it always already leads us into what is going to be implemented. So by the priorities of government, we know where to focus on. So very strong focus on national coordination and sharing experiences with other national platforms. The other point is, I think, to strengthen that, we would like to see this kind of a national compact or national dialogue towards a coherent policy put into the Global Compact. So in our recommendation on procedures towards the Global Compact is facilitate national multi-stakeholder dialogue as a first step of implementation. Don't pick and choose what's in the Global Compact. Don't just give. We need this opportunity, and we have to fix that in the Global Compact, that there is a process which leads into national discussions and dialogue for civil society involvement. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you. And then Claudia, you have the last word before we go into the closing ceremony.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Just 3 short comments. I think that regional consultations and this participation process fostered by the United Nations can be limited. I understand that there is a process through COSOC, but it is a source of concern for us because it is difficult for grassroots organizations or people that have a direct contact with the national population are not a part of these COSOC parameters. They are not in the list of those who have access to the consultations. So we should need to think through informal consultations with governments. How are the representatives of the civil society chosen so that our voices are represented and it's not only the experts who play in the major leagues internationally, which can be far away from what is happening at the base. This is why it is important to monitor this process. We should make use of regional instruments that are already existing. Our colleague talked to us about the African Union, which can be a mechanism We should foster procedures that exist at a regional level, and we should request that they are open and inclusive. Finally, maybe the Global Compact, as some people have said, will not solve anything at all. On the contrary, maybe some demands will not be reflected. In order to conclude, I would like to invite you to be subversive. And being subversive means that it is important that we are a part of this process, because it will have an impact on us and it will have an impact on the lives of millions of people. But we should not limit ourselves to that. As a civil society, we should be much more creative and subversive. We should start building our pact as a civil society from the bottom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this part of the program. We need to be quick and smart. We need to move together. We need to work at the national level. We need to encourage governments to have national consultations, but we also need to work on something that's worth it for us and not only lead what the governments are giving us, but have our own agenda. Thank you very much, panelists, for being so honest and provocative and practical, moving us forward into the next 1 year.